Hello and good evening. Welcome to our electric vehicle webinar. My name is Anuj Thair and I'm the Sustainability Engagement Officer at Ku-ring-gai Council. I'll take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners and the country from where all our participants join us today. I would like to extend our respect to the elders, past and present, other Aboriginal people, and the spirits and ancestors of the clans that have lived in these areas. Today's webinars on electric vehicles will aim not only to present the benefits of this safe and clean mode of transport, but it will also provide you an opportunity to hear from local residents about their experiences of owning EVs. I'm sure during the course of this webinar, you'll have many questions for our presenters. I'd like to remind you to use the Q&A function to submit your questions. Our presenters have kindly volunteered to answer your questions as and when they come up. And if there are any questions left unanswered, we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. Please feel free to use the chat function to comment and reach out if you're having any technical difficulties. This webinar will be recorded and posted on YouTube in a couple of weeks. I'll send you a link in an email in the next couple of days, along with information on upcoming EV test drive event and Council's rebate program. Today we have 4 presenters. And before we dive deep into everything EVs, I'd like to invite our first presenter, Peter Woon, Council's Senior Sustainability Officer, to talk a little about the community feedback we received through our Net Zero Communities program consultation and how it will guide Council's future initiatives in encouraging the uptake of EVs. Peter, the mic is all yours.
All right, thanks, Anuj. I'm just going to attempt to share my screen here. I'm hoping this is going to work for you all. There we go. Okay, great. Yeah, look, thanks everyone for joining us tonight, and thanks, Anuj, for inviting me to come and say a few words. Just a little bit about Council's strategy around electric vehicles and net zero communities and how it fits into our sustainable transport work that we're doing at Council. So just really quickly, a reminder of why a lot of us are doing this work at the moment. And a lot of it comes back to the fact that there's an urgent challenge that we face globally around climate change. And certainly, you know, the news out of the last month or so with the latest global conference in Glasgow has reinforced the fact that this is a bit of a global emergency, and that urgency is escalating. It's not sort of abating. So a lot of work going on in this space across local government, state government, and even at the federal level. But certainly as a local government, we're looking forward to seeing efforts ramping up across all sectors. And just quickly, if you don't know, Ku-ring-gai Council has in place a Towards Zero Emissions 2030 action plan, which was a roadmap that we developed to really support Ku-ring-gai's transition to a net zero emissions economy by 2040 or earlier. And this is about aligning, this is about having targets that align with the objectives of the Paris Agreement, but which are also reviewed every few years to make sure they're consistent with the science. We've also recently, as a council, joined the Global Race to Zero initiative, which is aiming to build support across society and the global community for climate action. And just quickly, what does that mean? What's that action plan and strategy mean for council? Well, there are 3 key sectors that we see make up the bulk of community emissions, with energy being the largest, but followed by transport and waste. And we also see that there's this very strong relationship between energy and transport, or what we sometimes refer to as stationary energy. And this is a relationship of opportunity, because as we continue to green the grid, roll out more clean energy with more wind and solar, it also means that any electrification we do of the transport system itself becomes cleaner and cleaner. But anyway, this is just to note that there are 3 key sectors that we're focusing on supporting the community currently: energy, transport, and the circular economy. Transport is certainly a large proportion of the emissions in Ku-ring-gai for the community. It's possibly up to 40%. And while that represents, a need for significant investment by governments, community, and business, it's also a really big opportunity to transform our transport systems and rethink things like our reliance on cars by making it easier to use alternative transport, cycling, e-bikes and walking, as well as the various other modes of transport that are emerging at the moment, which have a much lower footprint, environmental footprint than vehicles. But where we do need to continue using vehicles and cars, electrification is a huge opportunity where we have the chance to improve our air quality and public health. And also look at other opportunities, for example, supporting the grid and its transition to renewables. There's actually an opportunity that we face to support the grid if we're smart about how we set up our charging regimes and how we implement technologies that are coming down the line that relate to vehicle to grid and the sort of functions that they'll be able to offer in terms of grid stability. So as Anuj mentioned, Council recently went out to the community and did some consultation through some workshops and surveys to find out which actions the community felt were most important, or where they felt they really need support or could make some impact. And this was around net zero action. So this was around energy, transport and waste. And we also asked the community where they felt the key enablers and barriers for taking action were for them, either personally or as a business or as a community. And what I've shared here on the slide is really the top 10 actions that the community responded with through those workshops and surveys. And you can see that sustainable transport really features highly in that consultation. So whether it was the cycling and walking, the uptake of electric vehicles, and electric vehicle charging as a needed infrastructure as well. For us, really interesting to see Ku-ring-gai's residents recognizing all those different aspects of sustainable transport, and really encouraging for us to see. And if we have a look at what else the community were telling us in terms of the real opportunities to work together and enable these different opportunities, the top 10 things that, the top things that were brought up, you can see here on the slide in front of us. So, and this was specifically in the context of council and the community working together. So things like, really obvious things, I guess, like infrastructure and service provision to enable better access to walking and cycling through the LGA, but also around infrastructure for electric vehicle charging. Interestingly, education and awareness raising featured strongly in the feedback that we got. So information sessions like that's being run tonight is something that we're working on, as well as events that are coming down the track. We have an upcoming event to promote riding throughout the LGA, as well as ongoing communication through our Net Zero Communities program around upcoming events. Just quickly on the infrastructure side of things, a number of things that we have got going on at the moment includes assessments for multiple destination charger sites throughout the local government area. We've also got destination chargers that have been installed in the new commuter car park at Linfield Village Green, which we expect to be opened in December, January, so anytime now. In addition to that, we're assessing suitable sites for third-party fast chargers, which would generally be serving commuter corridors throughout the state. And we have an ongoing program to pilot and develop cycleways within the LGA. So when it comes to incentives, this was something that came up in conversation and discussion with the community, and it's an area that we're addressing through currently through a rebate for electric vehicle chargers to be installed in strata apartments. And this is really to address that barrier for anyone living in apartments where you don't have your own, you don't have the freedom to just set up a charger at home in the garage. You may have to set up a shared arrangement, which is shared across all the apartments there. This complements a number of other incentives that New South Wales Government have currently launched. And that includes the $3,000 rebates for electric vehicles, stamp duty exemptions on electric vehicles in New South Wales. And one additional thing which I found out about the other day was access to T2 transit lanes, T2 and T3 lanes for a period of time. So New South Wales Government has really come to the party on electric vehicles, and it's worth checking out what they're offering if you haven't yet. As far as planning controls go, electric vehicles and electric transport is a really interesting space, and we are liaising with New South Wales Government Department of Planning on this. It's going to require an evolution in planning controls for local governments. So again, we're working with Department of Planning, but also other councils on trying to understand the sorts of planning provisions that need to go in place, both for public charging, but also to ensure that new apartment developments are EV ready as they go in as well. And just lastly, I just want to address the point that was also brought up in consultation around leading by example. So the committee will often say to us, we expect council to really to really invest and take the lead on a lot of these initiatives. And we're certainly doing that in terms of council's own corporate footprint. We have a target for our fleet to be zero emissions by 2040. And currently we're incorporating electric vehicles where we can, where we have a fit for purpose opportunity into the passenger fleet. And we're also starting to look at options for exploring a pilot of electric trucks. There's some really exciting technology that has emerged out of Victoria, and we're excited to be looking at the opportunity to pilot some of that technology in council. In addition to that, we are also looking to procure a contract for council's electricity, which would have council powered by 100% renewable energy from July 2022. And this is a real complementary initiative for council to be able to have all of its vehicles that are electric powered by just the wind and the sun. So hopefully that just gives you a bit of a flavour for what council is up to. And I'm going to hand it back to Anuj now.
Thank you, Peter. That was a very good introduction to what the council has been doing. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my screen share. I'd now like to introduce you to our next speaker, Michael Day. Michael is the National Treasurer of Australian Electric Vehicle Association. He has an honours degree in electrical engineering and builds electric vehicles for himself and others. Apart from having a compulsion for EV projects, Michael has a passion for creating awareness and dispelling myths about EV ownerships. Australian Electric Vehicle Association, which is often called AVA, was formed in 1973 and is the oldest continuously active electric vehicle owners association in the world. Its purpose is to create great awareness of electric vehicles, encourage the rapid transition to electric transportation, and to be an official source of information on EVs in Australia. A very warm welcome to you, Michael, and now I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Anush. You did a really good job of introducing us. So let me just, I'm hoping you can see my slide.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So as you said, I'm National Treasurer of the Electric Vehicle Association, and you did a really good job of describing who we are. Anything I might add was we've got branches in every capital city. We were formed in 1973, which happened to be the year of the OPEC oil crisis, where people were looking at alternatives to electric vehicles, and so decided to start to build their own. And that's kind of where we started. But where we are now, we are EV builders. That's where I come from. EV owners like Peter and David, who are going to speak later. EV business owners, and then people who have been around the group long enough, like myself, that become lobbyists and advocates for electric vehicles. So in my fleet of electric vehicles, I started with the Toyota MR2 that I converted, must be around 10 or 15 years ago now. That was my first conversion. Then that was a petrol vehicle, of course, that I took all of the petrol vehicle components out of and made electric, battery electric. The next vehicle was the scooter, which was manufactured as electric scooter, but was broken by the time that I got it. So I repaired it, and it's now my daily ride. And then my latest project is the 2002 Lotus Elise, which again came to Australia as an electric vehicle. Was converted by another gentleman, fallen into disrepair. So weren't many people are interested in cantankerous old English sports cars that have been highly modified, except for me, and my wife thinks I'm crazy. So I've taken on and started the rebuild. And that's just some of the pictures of the process of it in my garage, where we're pulling it apart and starting to take away the ugliness, put in some of the newer components and get it back on the road, which hopefully will be fairly shortly. In fact, the early part of next year is the aim. But what we wanted to do now is talk a bit about the what and why of electric vehicles. And when we say EV, we tend to talk about BEV, battery electric vehicles, but really there's a bit of a spectrum when it comes to electric vehicles or vehicles in general, from internal combustion engine vehicles, what we drive generally today, that use fuel, gasoline, fossil fuel to fuel them. There's hybrid electric vehicles, which have got the fossil fuel engine and also batteries and electric motor in there to propel them. Or hybrid electric vehicles that have got a bigger battery and they can be charged externally. And then, of course, battery electric vehicles, which is pure electric. And the reason that I bring this slide up is as you can see, that the idea is, or the concept that we're trying to highlight here is that ICE hybrid electric vehicle, plug-in electric vehicles still use gasoline. And what we're trying to promote and push and encourage is the use of electric vehicles, and particularly running them off renewables. So we stop burning fossil fuels. And why we want to do that, of course, is to electrify everything, decarbonize the grid, stop burning fossil fuels in every way we can. Some stats, an example here of the effectiveness of electric vehicles and the displacement of fossil fuels from the transport sector. They're very good at encouraging us, allowing us to stop burning fossil fuels and to, importantly, start to move away from a carbon economy. And why is that important? Well, it's important because transport's such a big contributor to fossil fuel, what's I'm trying to say, get the words out in a moment, to greenhouse gases. That's what I'm trying to say. Transport in general is an extremely large contributor to greenhouse gases, and it's one of the few areas where we, as consumers, can have an influence. There's not much we can do with commercial. There's not much we can do in agriculture. There's not much we can do in industry. It's a little bit we can do in electricity generation. And we can't do everything when it comes to transport, but we can choose what we do for our own transport. We can choose to buy fuel efficient and electric vehicles, which will have and does have an impact on transport and its contribution to burning of fossil fuel and to carbon emissions. It's something we can all do. And along the way, there are a few other benefits to EVs, just apart from the environmental friendliness, particularly if they're run off renewables. They're cheap to run, as in my case. I've got a large solar system on my roof, and I charge my vehicles from as much as possible from renewables. They're practical transport, particularly if in and around town, which is largely what mine are, except they're kind of sports cars, so they're kind of not always practical, but that's kind of a different level of practicality, if you listen to my wife. No more petrol stations, which comes down to a convenience factor. It's super convenient just to come home, plug in the car, get up in the morning, unplug the car, and away you go. Don't have to go anywhere. You don't need petrol stations anymore. They are fun to drive. The torque factor of electric motors is a thing, and they are very fun to drive. And as you can see, I've tuned my cars to be fun electric sports cars, which are fun to drive. Safer in accidents. I mean, we see a lot of those sorts of things, commentary in the media about car fires, electric car fires. But if you look at the actual stats of petrol car fires compared to electric car fires, it's completely, the number of electric car fires is minute in comparison to the amount of petrol vehicles. Got to balance that a little bit against the fact that there are more petrol vehicles out there in the world than there are electric vehicles, but they are inherently much safer in terms of fire. Other impacts are we reduce our impact, the dependency on offshore energy, because we no longer refine nor search for our own or have our own gas fields anymore, petrol fields anymore. So we rely on other countries to supply not just the raw materials, but also the refined petrol. So electric vehicles allows us to, especially if you're running off renewables, reduce the dependency on offshore supplies of petrol. And they're also better for the air because they don't in themselves produce fumes. But sadly, in Australia, we're fairly unrepresented in global terms in EVs. We're still at the very low end of around 2% of new car sales. Just under 2% of new car sales are electric vehicles. We're not doing particularly well in that regards. There are part of that's because of incentives and encouragement, and that I'll get to in a moment. But also part of it's to do with the availability of vehicles in Australia, and I'll also talk a bit more about that as well. And as you can see, the standout model there is Tesla. Tesla are way out in front when it comes in terms of electric vehicles. They are the leaders, way out in front. And if you look at where we stand internationally, there are some countries that really hit way above their weight. Norway is an example. 70 or 80% of new car sales are electric vehicles. And that's because they have things like incentives. They do encourage the uptake of electric vehicles. They have electric vehicles available because the market is there geared for electric vehicles. And interestingly, the Nordic countries are actually very big producers of petrol and gas. They are a large part of their exports are petrol and gas, but they've decided to go with electric vehicles as a national imperative, and they are way out in front. We are unfortunately down even below the United States. I think we're 15th or 16th, or we're not even on this chart, disappointingly. Now, when it comes to electric vehicles in the country, we've got about 30 odd models, and we're seeing pleasantly that a few more models coming into the market quite soon. The Polestar, as an example, is just about to launch. The new Hyundai is coming out, or has just come out. But we're still not getting what I would say is the best of the electric vehicles at this stage, nor are we getting the range of electric vehicles that are available in other parts of the world. Europe, as an example, has got around 100 odd vehicles, and that's because the markets are attractive for the vehicle manufacturers to deliver electric vehicles there. They know they're going to sell. They know that the market is receptive to electric vehicles. But if you are interested in finding out a little bit more about electric vehicles, just bring this in. Hopefully you can see it when I bring in this webpage. This is the AEVA website. If you are interested in looking at an electric vehicle for yourself, we've got plenty of information. These are the fact sheets on the vehicles available in Australia. So if you're interested, you can go along and have a look at our website and do a bit more research about the electric vehicles that are available in Australia today. As Peter said a little bit earlier, that the New South Wales Government, we're quite pleased with the New South Wales Government. They rate quite highly on when it comes to the support of electric vehicles. And they've just recently announced the rebates, the stamp duty exemptions, the access to the transit lanes. They're looking at deploying electric vehicle charging network. There's two plans. One is for rapid chargers in and around the highways and byways, and they're also looking at deploying destination chargers in tourist spots as well. They've also got fleet incentives and the grants for the regional charging infrastructure. That's the destination chargers I talked about earlier. So just some FAQs, some of the common questions that we get about electric vehicles when we're out talking to them, when we're showing our vehicles, when we do presentations or when we show our cars. The first thing comes up is how do we fuel our vehicles? Isn't electricity still inherently dirty? Don't we still burn fossil fuels to fuel our vehicles? And that is true, but the grid is changing. Even the numbers that I was looking at before this, I had a really nice website that I meant to bring up that shows the progression of our grid, and it's changed from fossil fuel to clean energy sources. And even since the time I last presented this, the mix was about 80% to 15%. Now we're up to about 70% of fossil fuel and 30% of renewables, and it's increasing all the time. So the point that we make when people ask about how we fuel our vehicles is, well, you can fuel your vehicles, your electric vehicle, from renewables. I do every day. And as we decarbonize the grid, every year, every step of the way, our electric grid is going to be get cleaner and greener, which is not possible with a petrol vehicle. You just can't get a cleaner and greener petrol vehicle over time. In fact, they'll probably get dirtier and older. The next one we get is how long do the batteries last? And right now we've got a lot more vehicles and a lot more modern vehicles with a lot more sophistication in them nowadays, and the batteries are lasting for a lot longer than expected, a lot longer than the early models, I should say. So the life of electric vehicles is equivalent to petrol vehicles. You're getting very good mileage out of electric vehicles. We've got some really interesting analysis from the likes of the Tesla taxis in New York, and the amount of kilometers, 2 million odd kilometers that they'll get out of vehicles, to the point where the battery's still surviving, but the car's starting to fall apart. Or quite apart from that, that EV batteries themselves can be recycled. About 80–90% of all the components of an EV, a lithium-ion battery, can be recycled. Sadly, we don't do that in Australia just yet. What they're telling us is that the market's not big enough for us to do that, but it'll come. And in the bigger places, in the bigger geographies, they're definitely doing. The last question that is a common question is, what happens if you run out of charge? Well, the answer is you generally don't do that, because when you've got an electric vehicle, you tend to plan ahead. I mean, for me, my vehicles are largely fun cars that I drive around town, so I plan what I'm going to do. I know I'm going to drive into town, so I think about it, and I make sure I plug in at night. But if you need to go out on the highways and byways, then there's an app for that. So there are, this is the PlugShare website, which is pretty good. And as you can see, there are charge stations all over Australia, and it's growing. All sorts of providers are starting to get into this charging. NRMA is an example. One of the, I can't think it was McDonald's, or one of the other food vendors is getting involved. So charging is available. Yes, you do need to plan ahead, but like I say, there's an app for that to find these things. So if you plan your journey, you can find a place to charge. And in fact, if you're really stuck, as I have been in the past, you can rock up to a local shop and you can plug it in at any old power outlet, so you can charge from anywhere. It'll just take you a little bit more time. And while we're on the topic of charging, because that is another conversation starter, is there's generally two types of charging, if you will. There's AC charging and there's DC charging, which generally break down into AC charging means that you can plug into a socket at home, a 10 amp socket at home, or maybe a 3-phase socket at home, and that AC voltage is converted into a DC voltage, so that via an onboard charger to charge the battery. They tend to be about 2 to 43 kilowatts in range. They're what we call a level 1 or a level 2 charger. So a level 1 is your standard GPO, and your level 2 tends to be either a 16 amp socket or something even bigger than that, something dedicated to electric vehicles to give you a faster charge. And then at the top end of town, there's DC charging. And what that is it takes the AC voltage from the grid, uses some big, expensive and complicated electronics to convert the AC voltage off in a charge station, so not in the car, and charge the car externally. So it's a DC connection directly to the battery. And because we can put the big, powerful, expensive electronics off board, directly connected to a high-powered grid source, it means that we can charge a lot more rapidly, typically 50, 150 kilowatts, and even up into the 300 and 400 kilowatts, which is very fast. And they're generally used for on the highways and byways when you're going on longer trips. So the last thing that comes up is what's the future look like, particularly with charging in vehicle to X, which is definitely a thing. And when we say vehicle to X, it's vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, vehicle to load. And the easiest one is vehicle to load. They've got vehicles coming out now, like the F-150 electric in the US, that they're publicizing, marketing to tradesmen because they can power electric tools from the electric vehicle. Vehicle to home and vehicle to grid is the thing, but it's going to take time for that to develop. There is actually quite a few tests happening. There's one in the ACT at the moment, particularly with vehicle to home, vehicle to grid with Nissan. So it's definitely a thing that's going to happen. It's just that it's going to take time, probably 3-4 years for it to be a thing here in Australia. And that's because there's multiple different parts, standards, organizations involved. There's the vehicle manufacturer, there's the charger, there's the power companies, there's all of the standards associations that wrap around that. So it's going to take time for that to develop and evolve and be available in Australia, but it's definitely a thing. And interestingly, in places like Japan, it's kind of a national imperative. They're talking about it because they have a big focus on emergency services and being able to use power to their homes and power to power emergency services off their vehicles. So it's something that is a national imperative. So it'll probably happen a bit faster than here, where it'll take time for it to standardize and be available to the general public. And that's my 101 on EVs, Anush. I think it's over to Dave and Peter to talk about their experiences.
Thank you, Michael. Oops. Our next presenters are Claire and Peter Horsley, who have been Ku-ring-gai residents for 13 years. They've been driving electric cars for 2 years and currently own a Nissan Leaf and Tesla Model 3. They advocate the use of renewable energy and EV amongst other actions to mitigate the impact of climate change. To encourage the uptake of EV in Ku-ring-gai, Peter has recently signed up to be a World EV Ambassador. For those who are not familiar with WERL, it offers a service through which residents can book 30 minutes appointment with volunteers like Peter to discuss everything EV. It provides a great opportunity for one-on-one conversations you might want to have with an EV owner before considering to purchase one yourself. I will remember to include the link for the service in the email I sent you later on. Please join me in welcoming Claire and Peter.
Thanks very much, Anuj. Just going to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see that.
Yes, we can.
Getting some thumbs up.
Cool. So yeah, we're just both going to present because you know, we've been driving electric for a couple of years now, so just wanted to get both of our perspectives on this.
So we own a Tesla Model 3. We went for the long range version because both of our families live regionally. So we spend a lot of time when we're not in lockdown doing road trips to visit. So we get it's around 480 kilometers on a full charge with the 5 of us. We've got 3 kids in the back and all the luggage and that kind of thing. So the advertised range is about 580 kilometres, but the real world's probably closer to the 480. So my family live down sort of in the Riverina, down in Wagga. So we've done the road from Sydney down to Wagga multiple times. I've got to say, the first time we did that trip, I was a little bit nervous just with how the charging would work and that kind of thing, because it sort of pushes that 480 kilometres. But we planned ahead. We charged the halfway, get the kids out of the car, go to the park, have lunch, and it's really easy, really straightforward. So yeah, we've been down to Wagga a lot, down to Deniliquin as well, where my extended family are from. So that was quite cool. We charged in a big 4 down there. We've been to the snow with the car, and there's actually quite a lot of room. We fit toboggans in there with all the luggage, so that was pretty cool. And we've been all the way up to Lake Jelligo, where my mum's family's from. So that's about as far west as you go before you hit the desert. And yeah, we went to Canberra, as you can see on the slide there, but no one was home. We're just planning a trip after Christmas to go down and drive around Tassie. So we'll take the car over on the Spirit of Tasmania. Fingers and toes crossed that we're not locked down. We can go ahead with that trip.
So, and then after that, we're planning to go to Brisbane as well. So, yeah, I would say that it's fair to say that we don't feel restricted by our choice to drive electric. So there is a lot of infrastructure around, but as you say, that you've got to do a little bit of planning ahead, and that planning is obviously around charging. So I wanted to just show what charging looks like, because it's a very different experience to filling up at a petrol station. It's something that you kind of build into your trip, and there are different types of chargers. It's not just a one size fits all. So just wanted to point out some of the different types of chargers that we have here in Australia, and what they look like. So this one up the top left here is the Tesla so-called supercharger, and there's lots and lots of these around Australia, and they put them at nice places where you might want to stop for 20 or 30 minutes, or maybe may have lunch. So this is at a winery down in Berry. So to fill up with a supercharger takes about half an hour, depending on the size of your battery in your car. And they are for Teslas only at the moment, but Tesla is opening them up in other countries to non-Tesla vehicles. And so they will do that eventually everywhere. But for now, these are for Teslas only. So this is the fastest kind of charger. There are non-Tesla superchargers in Australia as well. I think in Queensland, there's certainly, and down in Tassie, there's some superchargers around there as well. The next fastest charger is a so-called fast charger. Essentially, this is about half the speed of a supercharger. So you'll spend double the amount of time to charge here. So this is an example of an NRMA fast charger up in Scone. And so you might spend an hour here. And generally, they're going to put them in places where there are shops, a park, place to sit down, toilets, because they know you're not going to want to sit in your car. And so they put it in a nice spot that's means you can stretch your legs and relax and come back in an hour's time. So there's NRMA have rolled out a huge network of these all around regional Australia. So they're really leading the way, and they're all free at the moment, which is really cool. The next level down in terms of speed is a so-called destination charger. So these are, if you might not be able to see in the background, but there's just little units that hang on a wall, and they'll have a charging cable that you can plug in. And these are about, let's say, about half the speed of this again. So you're going to be charging for 2 hours or so to fill up at one of these. And that's why they're called destination chargers, because they're normally at a place where you are going to stop for a couple of hours and you're doing something touristy, or you've got something there to do for a couple of hours. Obviously, you don't need to wait that long. You can get a top up to get you onto the next place. But you'll find these at places like farm stays, motels, those sorts of places. Next one down from there is, as Claire mentioned, we charged up over at Big Four Holiday Park out in Deniliquin. This is just a 15 amp plug that's in all caravan parks in Australia. So this is the same plug that you would use for a caravan. And so you can charge off there. That'll take a good like 8 to 10 hours to charge. So it's an overnight charge, but obviously, you know, if you're staying there, then no problem. You just plug it in and wake up in the morning, it'll be done. And then the slowest option is your 240 volt outlet power point in the garage. So this is kind of like your last resort option. This is the slowest, and this will take 20 hours to charge. So you want to plug that in as soon as you arrive, and then it's fine. I mean, you plan for that, and if you're staying overnight, we've never had any problem with having to wait for a charge to finish or anything like that. So
but you don't have to drain the entire battery before you charge again. So when you're using some of these slower methods of charging, it might be just to top it up. So you might just plug it in for half an hour or an hour while you're having lunch somewhere, just to get enough charge to get you to the next supercharger or the next fast charger with the NRMA network.
Yeah, it's a little bit different in that a petrol car, I think, traditionally you let it run down pretty low before you go to fill up. You wouldn't normally fill it up when you're only at 50%. Whereas an EV, it's a bit more opportunistic, and you sort of like, you want to fill up wherever you can at any time. And if you're at 50, bring it back up to 80 where that's possible. So it's not often that you're at 5% and you need to bring it all the way back to full. So yeah, there's a little bit of planning, and the big question is, of course, how do you find all of these locations? And that's with the app that Michael demonstrated called PlugShare. This is a mobile app and a website. And yeah, I won't repeat Michael's demo, but yeah, so I just wanted to point out that when you on these pins on the map, it's not just an isolated pin that tells you, yeah, there's a charger here. This is actually a crowd-funded, or not crowd-funded, but a crowd-sourced map of chargers for the whole world. And so you'll find that people add photos of all the charging locations. They'll write comments about everything's working fine. This is the speed I got. It's here to help people find the chargers, as well as things like what's available at that location, a park or restrooms, shops, and things like that. So there's a lot of information in here that really make planning a road trip quite stress-free. And the top 4 tips that I think we would give out for regional driving with an EV is to call ahead and ask. So if you're staying somewhere at a motel somewhere, you can ask, just give them a call and say, is there a power point there, or do you have an EV charger? And you'll surprisingly, a lot of people are very interested when they hear about this. A lot of people don't have a lot of experience still, so it's still a bit new for people. But we've found people very accommodating, at finding a power point for us somehow, if that's available. PlugShare, as you saw, extension leads in your boot are good. So you might park your car somewhere, and then the power point might be just a little bit out of reach for wherever you're parking. So yeah, extension leads are useful. And then probably the coolest thing is plan to enjoy the local area. When you're out in these regional towns, you're going to turn off the highway to go and charge, and you can go spend money, plan to go to a cafe, or enjoy the local things that area has to offer, because you've got a bit of time to go and enjoy it rather than just rushing through. And so you can see here, this is a charging spot down in Snowy Mountains. You can see the charger's actually in the background here, and there's a nice park here for the kids to play in. So it kind of really changes the focus of stopping to fill up into stopping to take a break and relax and enjoy those places along the way to wherever you might be going. So I think that's our top tips for regional driving. Thanks, Anuj.
Thank you, Claire and Michael. I think it was great to see those tips in. Generally gets everybody's expectations. If you have an EV, it's not something that they don't already do with the ICEs. You do plan out your trips anyways. Our next speaker is David Hardy. David is the founder of an online energy saving service called Whatever. Whatever combines David's passion for solar, electric vehicles, and energy efficiency with his analytics expertise to help Australians on the journey to save on energy. David has owned EVs for more than 10 years and is an EVA member advocating for electric vehicle adoption. He currently owns a Tesla Model 3 and a Hyundai Kona Electric. It gives me great pleasure to welcome David. You there, David?
I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Hopefully the video will come through shortly. The video is not coming through on my side, but hopefully, Anuj, you can turn on the video there. But I'll kick off with my screen share and just let me know if you can just confirm that's coming up okay. That'd be great.
We're back now.
And hopefully that slide's coming through.
Yes, it is.
Great. Okay, good evening to everybody. Now I'm going to look at really the day-to-day side of EVs. So Peter's covered off the long-distance driving, and while I've done quite a bit of that myself, driven down to Tassie, across to Adelaide, Brisbane, Melbourne, a number of times with work and so forth. I wanted to focus this presentation on kind of what is it like day-to-day to own an EV. What do you need to do with charging and all those sorts of things. So let's give you a feel for what it's like to live with an EV, or in our case, a few of them. So in the introduction, Anuj highlighted that yes, I've owned EVs for quite a while. I've owned Nissan Leaf, Mitsubishi Outlander, PHEV actually, and currently we have 2 cars in the garage. So we're a family of 3. I have a 12-year-old son, and we have 2 cars. So we have a 2020 Hyundai Kona Elite, which we've done about 10,000 Ks in. This is a pretty good long-range vehicle. It's got a 64 kilowatt-hour usable battery pack. We picked it up just a little under $50,000. As any of you have been looking for used EVs will see, the resale value on used EVs is quite high at the moment. So we'll probably actually get our money back on it. So the demand in the market's quite high. The other car we have is a 2019 Tesla Model 3. So when they first came out in the country, we got basically the basic package, the standard range plus, which I think is just called a regular Model 3 now. So there's a picture of us down in Strahan. So we took the car on the car ferry across and had a wonderful week and a half basically driving around Tasmania, where some of my family are from. So we've done about 28,000 Ks in a couple of years on that. It's not really high mileage. We do most of our driving in and around Sydney, the occasional trip to Melbourne and so forth. I think resale on those cars around about $55,000. The original price on that was around, I think, $70,000. We can talk about new prices later if people are interested, but I think they, with the grants and so forth you can get for the New South Wales government, that car, that Model 3, which is probably the highest selling EV, I'd imagine, particularly in that spec and colour, which is the lowest cost. I think it's just under $60,000 now for that car. The range is a little bit less than the Hyundai, but it is a very efficient car. It charges extremely fast. So Sydney, Melbourne, in a car like that is 10 hours, including stops. So a little bit more about our house and the setup that we have at home. So obviously the cars in the garage I've mentioned, there's some history on what I've had before. So on the bottom left-hand side of the presentation there, you can see a red motorcycle. That's actually a zero electric motorcycle I bought back in 2014. And that's a Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV. So obviously a combination of a petrol engine with a small battery. So at the time, it was a relatively affordable EV for me to go and take that bike racing. So I raced that bike around tracks like Eastern Creek and Winton and so forth for a couple of years. A lot of fun. So our home, we live in Wahroonga. We have 3-phase power at home. We have quite an extensive solar PV system. It's actually 23 kilowatts in total. We have a large battery storage, so it's a lithium ion pack, it's 50 kilowatt hours. And in terms of what do we do with that, we're currently on a market link plan. Some of those people who are familiar with new retailers, one called Amber, they have a market-based plan that we work with. So we're able to use that battery and solar to basically increase the amount of renewables during the day, so we can soak up excess solar, not just our own but others, and then we push that back into the grid in the evening when the prices are high. The result of all of that is that we earn quite a bit of money on electricity credits, while also absorbing extra renewables in the grid and then pushing them out in the evenings rather than people using coal. So we're playing a little part there where we can. So driving around town, so EV owners rave about their cars for a reason. So we're pretty fanatical about it. And if you ever get into any of the online forums, they're talking about the cars, whether it's the Tesla Model 3 forum, which is probably the biggest one in Australia. It has around about 10,000 members. I think they've sold around 10,000 Tesla Model 3 specifically in 2021. So, a lot of enthusiastic drivers, they love their cars. It certainly is a fantastic experience driving them. Why? The Tesla basically is, and all EVs are basically more responsive, smoother acceleration, quieter, safer, etc. And I think I've got a different version of this presentation, which we just published up on our website. If you want to go to whatever.com.au and have a look at the blog, we actually posted an article on there, which is basically, I think it's 68 reasons why you choose an EV over a petrol car. So our family and I deliberated for a while, and pulling together that, we managed to get to 68. Didn't quite get to the magic 100 reasons for EVs, but we certainly got pretty close. So yeah, have a look at that. We'll maybe Anuj can send a link out and the presentations afterwards, and I'll update the presentation with that link. But yes, a lot of good reasons for going through that. I guess the key thing in terms of the differences between driving experience-wise, probably the most significant one is regenerative braking. So the idea when you come off the throttle of the car slows down and puts charge back into the battery. So Peter and I were involved, and Michael actually ran the overall event, but we've done a lot of test drives in the past, and Peter has done those as well. And the biggest thing that those first-time EV drivers have to get used to is the idea the car coming to it. Car slows down quite quickly when you come off the throttle. And a lot of cars like the Teslas and others, BMW, etc., have a single pedal driving function. So if you basically take your foot off the throttle or the accelerator, the car will effectively come to a stop. So it takes a while to get used to, but maybe with an hour or two is all it really takes to get quite smooth at that. So except for hard braking, most of us wouldn't really bother using the brake pedal. So in terms of what are the sort of differences with the different EVs, I guess price point wise, you're starting around about, this is driveway price, about 44 to 45,000. I think it's the lowest cost brand new EV as a passenger car, which is the MG ZS EV. And from there, you sort of move up through the Hyundai range into the Tesla range, and there's Audis and Porsches at the top end. But as you sort of move up from those base specs, and there's obviously used cars as well, so things like the Nissan Leaf and Mitsubishi Outlander, and used Teslas, for example, that have been around sort of since 2013, 14. As you spend more money, effectively, you get a better car. So that generally means a higher performance, better acceleration, faster charging, longer range, etc. So, for example, we sold our Nissan Leaf recently for around about, I think, $14,000, $15,000. We'd had it about 7 years. Its range was down to about 80, 90 K, so it was quite a small, short range car. but relatively inexpensive and is a good, driving around commuter car. It's quite good, but obviously it doesn't have the range to be able to do, the interstate trips like Peter and his family have done as have we. So that's something to bear in mind if you're in the market. Additional features that are kind of cool is things like auto steer, which is a Tesla feature, and also in some of the Hyundais where the car will basically keep you in your lane for you as you're driving along. The more advanced ones will have things like over-the-air software updates. So, for example, Tesla just put an update through on our vehicle where added waypoints to the navigation, added title music and some other features. So they're constantly upgrading their cars. So better vehicles, better EVs will have more advanced capabilities. And some of you might be familiar, vehicle to load, which is something that Michael mentioned earlier, is something that's coming along in new EVs. So the Hyundai Ioniq 5 will provide this feature. And basically the feature allows you to plug in up to 3.6 kilowatts, so more than you can power off a regular power point. So basically you can plug in a regular appliance, be a kettle, a toaster, an oven, up to that power limit. And the car will actually convert the DC from the battery into AC going into that regular appliance. And it's a regular 3-pin socket, or technically a 15-amp 3-pin socket. So basically you can run jumping castles, so you can go somewhere and have a jumping castle next to the car. There's some good YouTube videos on that. But also you can just, you can go camping and you've got a very, very large battery pack in the Hyundai Ioniq. I think it's over 70 kilowatt hours to be able to run things. So quite useful for camping. So we'll see more vehicles with that. There's a Kia coming out in 2022. Next year's 2022 MG ZS EV also has vehicle to load capability. I think it's available in the UK shortly, if not already. So we're going to see that as the first dabblings of the vehicle, the V2X that Michael was talking about. That's now coming into the market, and we'll see more of that in time. And certainly vehicle to grid and vehicle to home is something that I've played with myself, and we have been able to actually implement effectively a vehicle to grid system using the Hyundai Kona. Because it does have a utility mode function, and we are actually able to take power from the car, put it into our battery pack at home to basically top it up if we need to. So yeah, these things are certainly coming along, and the cars are advancing quite quickly. So I imagine that many of you, if you're into sustainability, will certainly have solar on your roof. So the economics around EVs is very similar to the economics that you went through when you first installed a solar PV system. So generally, as a sort of rule of thumb, for each kilowatt of PV you put on your roof, you can save around about $200 per annum on your electricity bill. So if you put a 5 kilowatt system in, you'll save around about $1,000, maybe a little bit less, depending on how much shade and so forth you have. So yeah, so basically putting a regular size system, it's a common system, 5 or 6 kilowatts. That's the sort of saving you can achieve from solar. Nice thing about solar is it's quite cheap. So for that size system, probably only costs you $5,000. So payback on solar is pretty impressive. Solar payback, as many of you would know, is around that sort of 5-year period for most households, and commercial can be even better than that. I'm looking at the electric vehicle savings. So yes, electricity is cheaper than petrol. So there's some calculations that I've sort of put in here, and I won't read through each of those and how much consumption there is and so forth. But I'll just go to that yellow line, which basically is covering off. So for a car that's doing about 15,000 Ks a year, and assuming $1.50 per litre on petrol, which is actually quite conservative. I just drove past one today up at Thornlea, and the petrol price was $2.16 for Shell Premium V-Power, and I think it was $1.91 for E10 unleaded. So the savings have probably gone up a little bit over the last month or two with the high prices. But rough rule of thumb here is if you're switching from a petrol car to an EV, you're going to save yourself about $100 for every 1,000 Ks you drive, given the current pricing. And that's assuming that you're charging your car off peak. You'll save a little bit more if you're charging off your own solar, because the feed-in tariffs now are lower than the off-peak rates. And obviously, that gives you the opportunity to reduce emissions as well if you're charging off your own solar, which we do, and Peter does, and Michael does also. There's obviously other savings around EVs. So the regenerative braking means there's less brake wear. Just usually it brakes a lot less. And obviously, no plugs and no oil changes. There's still some servicing. Most EVs, with the exception of Tesla, have a standard servicing requirement that you need to do to comply with the warranty. Tesla doesn't, but they still have recommendations about maintenance. But it is certainly a lower cost than you'd expect to see for a regular petrol or diesel car. So obviously you need to factor these things in when you look at the upfront purchase price. So the upfront purchase price, depending on what the car is, would generally be higher. So Hyundai petrol will be less expensive than an electric. When you get to certain vehicles, I would argue something like the Tesla Model 3 at $60,000 is probably already at price parity or better than, for example, a BMW 3 Series with the same performance and space and so forth would actually be the same price or more. So it depends which car you're talking about that sort of break-even point in price parity. But certainly, there's significant savings available here, depending on how far you're driving. And obviously, the further you drive, the more savings you're going to generate. Just going back on that previous photograph, that was a photo of us with a Model X down South Australia, there on Flinders Island there. So charging at home, I think there are a couple of questions in the Q&A, which hopefully Peter and others are keeping an eye on to answer those. So all EVs come with what we call a trickle charger, sometimes called a granny charger. It's put into the trunk when you buy the car. Generally, they're either a standard 10 amp power output. I've put notionally sort of 2 to 3.6 kilowatts. So when we refer to 10 amp sockets, that's just your regular Aussie standard 3-pin socket. Technically, 10 amps is at 230 volts, is 2,300 watts or 2.3 kilowatts. So sometimes you get ones a little bit faster. They'll give you ones a little bit quicker, but they require a slightly different sort of plug. It's a 15 amp socket. So it's a little bit different. But the bottom line is there, with what you drive away with when you get a car or a used or a new one, is a plug, a charging cable effectively, what we refer to as an EVSE. That's about 15 to 25 k's of range per hour. A lot of people, I'm not sure what the stats would be, but I suspect at least 30% of EV owners would just use that and nothing else. Why? Because if they're staying at home, if they charge overnight at home and they plug it in, they can add 150, 200 kilometers of range easily every night. So unless you're driving that every day, you don't really need to charge faster than that. However, there are people like me who like to do things very fast. So we actually have 2 11 kilowatt charging stations. So they're a hardwired charging station. They require higher power. So rather than that 2.3, 2.4 kilowatts for regular power point, these can charge up to 11 kilowatts, or for our particular, for the Model 3 supports 11 kilowatts of AC charging. So that adds about 75 k's of range. So in our case, the car has a range of about 350 kilometers. It takes about 5 hours from completely empty, which rarely ever happens, unless we're coming home from a long trip. It takes 5 hours to charge from completely empty to completely full, and to then good for another 350 k's for the next day. In our case, we don't really do that very often. We actually charge our cars a couple of times a week. In my case, because of the nature of our electricity plan, when the wholesale market prices go negative and there's a large amount of renewables in the grid, particularly on the weekends, we actually will charge up our cars on the weekends in the middle of the day, or any other day if we need it, but primarily we will charge up on the weekends to take advantage of that lower cost electricity. There's in-car timers, means all this stuff is usually set and forget. So there are some people who, like me, are trying to do some more advanced charging. But most people will probably be on an off-peak time of use type rate, and they would just plug the car in and set it to charge at 10 o'clock at night or something like that. Or obviously, if they have solar at home, then they can set it to charge, for example, between 10 and 2. There's new smart charging apps, which look at things like, and also charging stations, which look at how much excess solar you have, what percentage of renewables there are in the grid, market price and things, and they'll actually, they'll optimize your charging for you. So as soon as you start exporting more than the minimum, which is technically 1.4 kilowatts, then it will actually turn on your charging station and charge from your own solar. And if the clouds come over for long enough, it will stop and then restart again when it's sunny. So there's some good things there if you want to be able to have sort of emissions-free driving that help you with that. So in our case, yeah, the high powered charging and the battery gave us a lot of flexibility to charge faster, but you know, we really don't use that often. But you know, it's one of those we could, so we did. Okay, there's a few questions we saw in the Q&A around the fast charging prices. So there's only one thing you remember out of this presentation. It's the number 2.2. So the question is often asked, you know, how do you work out, you know, electricity prices and the cost to charge? So simply, if you want to get a per litre equivalent of pricing, whatever the price you're paying for electricity is, whether it's a fast charger or whether it's off your solar and you're foregoing a feed-in tariff, if you multiply that cost by 2.2, that would be the cost in petrol equivalent. So, for example, in Ausgrid, the average feed-in tariff at the moment is around about 7 cents, which means it costs around 15, 16 cents per litre. If you're charging just off your own solar, you would obviously forgive exporting that to the grid, cost you about 15, 16 cents per litre. Compared to $1.90, that's a pretty good deal. But, for example, if you're on an anytime rate, you don't have solar, flat rates in our area around about 20 cents a kilowatt hour. You can get down to about 17. So you're still looking, even if you're just plugging on a flat rate tariff, still under 50 cents per litre. So still a significant saving. A couple of other questions we had were around, okay, so what other options are there? So not everyone can charge at home, understood. So there are increasing number of public charging stations. So one I sometimes go to, it's just outside Ku-ring-gai. There's one at Pennant Hills Marketplace there. They happen to offer charging stations there. They happen to be free. They're basically the same as a home charging station, so they're relatively slow. So they're about 50 to 75 kilometres per hour. You can stop in, do your shopping, come back, and it's free. It's just part of being a customer there of that particular shopping centre. St Ives has one as well. They have 2 stations in their basement car park there. They're also free, but I think only for the first hour. So we'll talk a little bit further on about PlugShare and some of the apps that help people find charging stations. But usually in the app, it'll actually explain what the costs are. And in some cases, you need like an RFID card or an app on your phone to be able to unlock the charger, particularly if it's paid. So yeah, cost-wise, sometimes those AC stations, if they do charge it, they can charge you up to about 30 cents. So a little bit more expensive than charging at home, but still relatively, compared to petrol, not too bad. Public fast charging, which is basically where the chargers are putting large amounts of energy into your car in a very short period. So these are charging, I think in our car, it charges up to about 1,200 kilometres now. So we can go from basically 0 to about 80% state of charge in about 20, 25 minutes, which adds probably another 250 kilometres of highway range for us. So for those ultra fast chargers, they are very expensive for them to install. They are put in regional areas which don't have a lot of power supply. So generally they're expensive. So we see higher pricing here. So with the exception of NRMA, who are very kind in offering their DC fast chargers around the state for free, the commercial networks, be it Tesla, EVIE, ChargeFox, they charge generally around 32 to 60 cents per kilowatt hour. So it's certainly much more expensive than home. And, unless you really didn't have an option to charge at work, home, shopping centre, whatever else, that they are certainly there. They are quick. You could drop in there for 15, 20 minutes once a week at a couple hundred Ks range and you're probably good. But cost-wise, we're starting to get up closer to petrol on the most expensive network, which currently is EVIE, albeit they also offer very fast charging. So just some tips around driving and charging and how do we actually do that. So as I mentioned, there's an app called PlugShare. You can download it for iPhone and for Android. That basically lists all of the commercial networks, charging stations, the NRMAs, the Tesla superchargers, the ChargeFoxes, the EVIEs, all those fast chargers. It also has the slower AC chargers that are offered at shopping centres and other areas, retail outlets and so forth that provide that. And so this is the diagram on the left there just shows you an overview of Sydney. The green are the slower AC chargers. and the orange are the DC fast chargers. So currently in Sydney, we have around about a dozen DC fast charging stations. If we look on the right-hand side, the federal government, or as part of ARENA, has supported what's called a Future Fuels Fund, which is basically co-funding the delivery of a large number of fast chargers over the next 3 years across both metropolitan areas and regional areas. So this is a map of Sydney. All those orange spots are all the stations that are going to be funded or have been funded. So they're partly funded by ARENA and also by companies like Engie and others, and EVIE, to put in more fast charging. So you can see very quickly we're going to be around, I can't count the dots there, but probably another 60 fast chargers across Sydney in the next 2 or 3 years. So that's certainly changing very quickly. So a couple other points in here in terms of, if you're going to use those local charging stations, we need to treat them a little bit like going to a regular petrol station. You can't just leave your car there and go away. Once the car is full, you need to move on. So EV stations are for charging. So those, if you're stopping at a shopping centre or whatever else, you should plug in and utilise them. Otherwise, other EV owners will obviously get upset. Generally, those stations, depends on what they are. Sometimes you need to buy what they refer to as a Type 2 adapter. It's basically a BYO cable. So you bring your cable along. I think it's around $250, $300. You can bring one of those cables along. And that just allows you to plug into those slower AC charging stations. So when you're traveling and using the DC fast chargers, they come with their own high powered charging cables and everything. You don't need that. Those particular adapters is something you use. I use, for example, if I want to go to Pennant Hills, St Ives actually include those Type 2 adapters on the walls. They're sort of secured in place. And obviously, yeah, we try and frequent businesses who offer charging because they're obviously supportive. So whenever we go traveling, we always look for a combination that offers EV charging. And, we like to give them their business because they're supporting us. So that's giving you a bit more, hopefully a bit more background around, what it's like to own an EV, what sort of tools, help you to optimize, your charging. Understand there's charging stations out there. Where are they? And yeah, I'm not sure whether they're included in the rest of this presentation, but there's a couple of other apps that are also helpful. So if you're doing route planning, while cars like Tesla will do a great job of being able to route you through the Tesla superchargers. If you want to drive out to Dubbo or Burke or other places, you might want to use some other stations. There are other apps like a Better Route Planner, which helps you to plan long distance trips with lots of waypoints and overnight stays and all those sorts of things. So there's some quite advanced trip planning out there if you want to go off the beaten track and do something. If you're just doing Sydney, Melbourne, it's straightforward. It's, the stops are well known and the car will navigate you there. But once you go far into the country, inland, then it helps to use some of those apps to guide you around. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, David. That was brilliant. I think, thank you all for taking care of the Q&A so quickly. There are no questions left there, except I think a couple of them. There is one which probably, David, with your setup at home, you might be in a better position to answer. This is just a query with regards to where would one go if one was to design a system to take care of three-phase solar linked to batteries, and I'm assuming these are EV batteries or even home batteries for that matter. What would you advise? Where would people start their search?
So I guess there's, three phases. Let me explain what three-phase is, because a lot of people won't be familiar with that. So most homes in Australia that are built with effectively one single live line. We refer to it as single phase coming into the house. That line generally has a maximum input of power, which technically is 100 amps of power at 230 volts, whatever else. So that allows you to run a regular house without an issue. However, if you want to run larger air conditioning systems or potentially faster charging stations, then three-phase power effectively gives you 3 live lines and therefore triple the amount of power that you can bring into your house. Is that necessary? No. Is it something that people like to have? Yes. In the case of solar, for example, it allows you, often in Ausgrid, for example, allows you to increase the size of the solar PV system. So if you're in Ausgrid, which is the network that Ku-ring-gai sits in, you're able to install a solar PV system up to 30 kilowatts. Technically, that's the inverter capacity, not the panels, so you could actually oversize it more. So the three-phase gives households some flexibility to install higher powered equipment if they want it or need it. My view is that it's not necessary. If you buy a single phase charging station, you can still charge at 7 kilowatts, which is 3 times faster than a regular power point. We'll add 50 kilometers an hour. It's not really necessary for an EV. So with that sort of background, how would they go about it? So the first question is, have they got 3-phase already? If they already have 3-phase in the home, then they certainly can look. It would be advantageous to have particular types of solar setups. But it's probably a long discussion as to which is the best, because battery and solar on 3-phase gets complicated. And that's probably the best way to describe that, and leave it at that and say, look, if you want to get in touch, if there's a person got a specific question about how would it work, then I'd probably answer it offline. There are more complexities because inherently that battery needs to provide power to all 3 phases, particularly in a blackout situation. It needs to do that. So it is a more complicated answer. So if you don't have 3-phase already, there's not a huge amount. There are some benefits to it, but it also comes with some drawbacks, particularly if you want to have full backup on your home. So for example, I know Peter has some Tesla Powerwalls that he has at home. If he has 3-phase at home and he wants 3-phase backup, like backup on all the grid went out, which it did at our place last night, he would need to put a Powerwall on all 3 phases in order for it to provide power. So if he wanted to run his air conditioning flat out in the middle, 3-phase air conditioner, it would be more expensive for him to do that. So there are some downsides with 3-phase in terms of it. If you're wanting to have things like backup across all 3 phases in a blackout, it can be more expensive. So it's usually, what are you trying to solve? Do you want your car to charge a bit faster? Probably doesn't matter. If you want to remove your reliance from the grid or handle those blackout situations, then yes, if you're willing to absorb the cost of that, it's certainly, it can be done. I have it. It's costly to do what I've done, but it gives you a lot of flexibility, power. We've had almost EV charging parties over to allow multiple people to charge at the same time. So that's pretty rare that someone would need that. This is the sort of power I have is what a business would have to be able to supply a couple of cars charging in the front door. So yeah, hopefully I've covered that, because it's not a simple answer.
No, let's look, and these are quite common questions that we get otherwise anyways, and they're quite a bit, I think people tend to look for perfect solutions. Even the concept of, if you have an EV, that it should only be, it's only worth having an EV if you can charge it only by green energy. And that's a topic that you've covered very clearly. As the grid greens, we can, it's an issue that can easily be taken care of. And the fact is that we're not looking at a perfect solution, we're looking at a transition. And the fact there is a comparison between an electric vehicle and an ICE and the impacts it has, not just on the environment, but on our health and on our pocket. So it's that thing of just taking that step and moving in that direction rather than waiting for that perfect solution, which might be some time away.
Yeah, and it depends on the person on that. So for if you're wanting to do things more with your green electricity supply, I mean, you can do things that have no cost impact. So you just run more things during the day. So if you have no solar, we know that most days of the week, and when it's a really sunny day, more than 50% of New South Wales electricity supply is coming from renewables. So if you plug in and use things then, whether it be charging a car or running your pool pumps, you are using more. And significantly now we see a lot of solar curtailment, which is the solar farms actually turn off, particularly on weekends. We have too much supply, coal power stations can't turn down. So it's certainly, you can just change behaviors, and you can be confident that you are actually having an effect by charging at the middle of the day on weekends, particularly, but even during the week, you're looking at 40+% renewables, up to around 60%. I can get, if you're charging at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're looking at about 5 or 10. So that's something to bear in mind if you're trying to, without even thinking about solar aware charging stations or other things like that. Yeah, so there's certainly things people can do that don't necessarily have a cost impact to them to go down that better path.
Michael, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, well, just Anush, there was one question, an interesting question in the Q&A was, why are some countries, the uptake of EVs greater than others? You know, there was a comparison in the chat about a large country like Australia and a large country like America. Is it less attractive? I'll turn that around the other way. The countries where EV uptake is the greatest and the most attractive is where they've got fuel efficiency standards. So Australia doesn't have fuel efficiency standards. So there's no great attraction for anyone to bring in fuel efficient vehicles. Whereas places like Norway, stand out, they've got very strong fuel efficiency standards. So of course, that's where they've got electric vehicles because it's very attractive for them to choose and drive them. And the same would be the case for the US. They don't have very strong fuel efficiency standards. They don't have very efficient cars.
Except in California, where they do have a lot of.
Oh, that is true. That is a standout. And an exception to the rule. You are correct.
Thank you so much for this. There are not many other questions that are left, but what I would do is, if you do have any questions, you will receive an email from me. Please feel free to reach out. I know that I can always reach out to Michael, David, and Peter at any given time if there are any very difficult questions coming my way, and we do have access to a great resource here in them. So please feel free to shoot out any questions. I'd also like to tell you, I mean, the couple of things that came up with regards to how you manage energy, etc. We do have a Green Star Home Assessment Program, and council officers, this is something that is offered free to our residents. We do come across to your home and kind of assess what your energy consumption. So we haven't actually been to a home with EVs, so there might be some degree of limitations, but this is where I would rely on the experts such as Michael, David, and Peter going forward. But please feel free to reach out and we'll be able to help you. Peter, would you have something?
Oh, I just noticed there was a question in there relating to charging options for apartment people who live in apartments that may not have off-street parking. And it might be just worth mentioning the rebate from council at the moment for shared private charging in apartment dwellings. So if you do have maybe visitor parking bays that Strata are willing to look at putting in shared charges, that's an option. You can, Anuj runs that program, get in touch with him. And
all comes down to me, isn't it? No, but I will send you links for that. So the rebate programs are there. We're looking at other rebates too, moving forward. And I think that will all be directed by what comes out from our analysis of our consultation process that we've had in the past. And yes, I can also see there's a question about the green energy, which is something which you don't need to have an EV to go all green. As long as you got an electricity account, you can offset your entire consumption with green energy even now. So it is an option that's there for you. But thank you once again. I think, yeah, we've called it a day for this webinar, and we will be in touch. We will share all the important links moving forward. So in a couple of days, I'll send you that email, and you're free to contact me at any given time. Thank you to all our presenters and everybody else who has joined us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
you.